Hello, everyone. My name's Costain. I'm the founder of the Food and Global Security Network and producer of the Farmgate podcast. Apologies for the slightly late starting. We had a few technical issues with translation, but we're good to go now. This session is called Adjusting to the New Normal, Building Resilient Food Systems in the Face of Climate Change, Supply Shocks and Rising Energy Costs. Now, as we know, humanity has spent decades separating itself from nature and assuming that the basic functions we all depend upon have an infinite capacity for renewal. Today's session is assuming change, but what does that change look like? We have 3 years of COVID, a year of conflict in Ukraine, and the ongoing cost of living crisis. Where have they led us? Despite mounting evidence that the disruption of Earth's natural processes is accelerating, and despite conversations and commitments at COP27 and COP15, we seem to be facing national and global policy retrenchment as the immediate political reality of economic crisis trumps action to restore the very Earth systems upon which we all depend. Despite the fact that in the last 3 years, the weaknesses in our global food systems have been viscerally exposed, the import dependency, the fragility of just-in-time supply chains, the systemic vulnerability to financial markets and indeed dictators. Despite that, many of our policymakers have turned back towards business as usual and away from their emergent strategies to restore soil health, to reduce warming and to re-establish the building blocks of nature upon which our food production and nutritional and civil security depend. So is this pivot to the old what we mean by the new normal? Or perhaps, but it also seems to me that more and more people are taking it upon themselves to be the change that's needed, and nowhere is this more apparent than in our food system. Although food production remains super extractive at a global level, at a local and sometimes regional level, in every country in the world, producers and food businesses have been choosing to opt out, to step away from the treadmill and to take control of their own lives, land, and fortunes. Each year, there are more and more examples of resistance and resilience, of farmers turning to regeneration as environmental awareness rises and as the cost of chemicals becomes too high, of chefs and restaurants searching for independent traders and nutritional quality, of producers working together with customers and new technology to establish self-governing supply chains. So is this change part of the new normal as well? Well, I think so. There is a disruption underway, not only environmentally, but socially and economically. And this provides an opportunity, perhaps a unique moment in which agroecology and social change could thrive and accelerate together. So today we'll take stock of the evolving impacts of the food price crisis and the opportunity that it represents for eliminating harmful dependencies and accelerating longer-term agroecological transformation. Now, I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our exceptional panelists. Yodit Kebede is an independent researcher who recently worked with the BioVision Foundation on its agroecology dialogue. And Mottet is from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Emile Frison is an expert from IPES Food. And Esther Penunia is from the Asian Farmers Association and the Agroecology Coalition. Welcome, everyone. We have a total of 90 minutes. I'm going to lead a discussion with our panelists until around about midday. And then if you'd like to join us for the Q&A, I'm afraid you'll need to move to a Zoom link, which I'll direct you to later for our remaining time together. So in the meantime, please take advantage of the system to introduce yourselves and to make comments and to send us any questions that we'll be collecting as we go. Emile, if we may, let's start with you and the food price crisis sparked by the war in Ukraine. Governments and the United Nations have all been trying to get grain out of Ukraine and to ensure that farmers have enough fertilizer to increase production and reduce the risk of bigger supply shocks in the face of rising global hunger. Is this the right approach?
Well, I think that the first part of your proposal of getting grain out of Ukraine is an absolute necessity. I think there is a short-term food crisis possible if we don't manage to get grain out of Ukraine. So the efforts that have been made in that sense are absolutely necessary and welcome. The second part is more questionable. I think we really have to take this opportunity of the crisis that you well described to have a real transformation, not just trying to improve our system marginally, but to have a real agroecological transformation. And that is one that addresses economic, environmental, climate, nutrition, health, and social objectives simultaneously, and no longer having production policies that are polluting the environment, just wanting to maximize yields, etc., at the expense of the environment, of health, and of social equity. So I think we really must take this opportunity to go towards a significant shift in the way not only we practice agriculture, but where we look at the food system as a whole and see what needs to change to make it sustainable, to make it resilient. And I think there are enough examples around the world that show that this is possible and that this is the way forward. So we really must take advantage of this crisis situation to accelerate significantly this transformation.
Thanks very much for that, Emile. Yodit, can agroecology provide the solutions, as Emile suggests, to these challenges? For example, can it help us to address the immediate challenges of fertilizer and energy scarcity at the same time as building longer-term resilience?
Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. The first immediate answer will be actually yes, but I will detail you why. Already this year, there were observation on how agroecological farming systems were actually showing more resilience compared to other type of system. But before going in deep, the reason behind that is I have to tell you like what is actually in the practice help this resilience. As the practice, agroecological farming systems are based on ecological processes such as diversification, crop livestock integration, intercropping with legumes, and they promote actually nutrient cycling at the farm level, but also at the territory level, at the plot level. So agroecology promotes production systems which are more independent from external chemical inputs, such as pesticide, fertilizer, and which is also a mode of production which is impacting less environment, and which have been also showing to be less impacted by the current fertilizer price increase. So last September, BioVision Foundation gathered about 95 people, from researchers, technicians, people from ministries of agriculture from different countries, policymakers, NGOs, to discuss what have been actually the impact of this price increase and what are the differences that they've seen between agroecological farming system and more conventional farming systems. What they saw and what the participant actually said, that they could already see that agroecological farmers were more resilient to the increase of the input prices for different reasons. First, they were actually already in a process where they are less dependent on it. Second, they were also promoting actually the distribution of their products on a more local level, so they were less subject to transport cost increase. They were also actually enjoying an increase in price of food because of the crisis. The price of the food actually increased, so they saw themselves actually having higher income. So overall, the production cost was much more convenient and much more advantageous in this new normal for agroecological farmers.
Thanks very much. Yodit, we're having a little bit of trouble with your audio, and I don't know, before I come back to you, if you're able to perhaps see if there's another place to boost your Wi-Fi signal in some way, or we might just need to turn your video off if it persists. But let's try for now. Esther, if I could maybe come to you, we've just heard there from Yodit that agroecology makes farmers and communities more resilient. This is what we believe. But could you tell us how agroecological farms and rural communities and local markets that you're aware of have fared in the face of recent shocks, and how these experiences have compared to those that are still more reliant on industrialized food systems?
Thank you, ffinlo, for the question, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Thank you.
In our observation, agroecological farms who have relied on homegrown local inputs and have connections with local markets and have an agency through their farmers' organizations and cooperatives have fared much better in times of this crisis rather than those who have relied more on exports and on synthetic and external inputs and have lesser support from others than themselves. Allow me to share with you some on-ground experience to concretize what Yodit has mentioned earlier. In the Philippines, in the early months of COVID, when the local markets were still not functioning normally and there was a lockdown, so export markets were not there, a budding women-led cooperative of indigenous peoples started a weekend farmers market in a low-cost subdivision 2 hours away from their community, bringing their members locally, organically grown produce, such as root crops, fruits, and vegetables, near to the subdivision residents whose mobility was also restricted by lockdown rules. With the facilitation of the National FO, the cooperative is affiliated with, the Homeowners Association in the subdivision has allowed the use of its covered basketball court for the weekend market. The business has increased the farm gate prices for the farmers in the villages, decreased the prices for the subdivision residents, and ensured healthier, safer food for them as well. This kind of direct farmer-consumer relationship has been intensified during the COVID with our members in Indonesia and in Laos selling online their organic rice and vegetables, our members in Cambodia strengthening their local shops for organic chicken, rice, and vegetables. Another on-ground experience is integrated diversified farming that is being done by many members in Philippines, Indonesia, Laos, and Cambodia, and as Yodit also mentioned earlier. A very good example at the household level is the farm of the Paharon couple in the Philippines. Long before COVID-19, they have already shifted to integrated diversified farming and became active leaders also of their cooperative who process the produce of its members and sell it to the local market. At the onslaught of COVID, the couple was resilient as they are still able to produce food, relying on homegrown organic fertilizers and pesticides and integrated pest management. Since their income sources are also diversified, from eggs of organically grown ducks to fish in their ponds and the pigs they raise and the bananas they produce, as well as vegetables, they became more resilient as well economically. Since their cooperative produces mainly for the local market, their sales was not so much affected as they can be mobile in selling and transporting their products to their local market and shops. So this is our analysis. No? When we use agroecological systems and practices, as Yodit has mentioned also earlier, our input costs are reduced, our soils become healthier and more diverse, and thus our food become more healthy and nutritious, our harvests grow, and we can adapt more to the climate, we can reduce our prices, as well as our knowledge flourish, our innovation spirit is challenged because we are called to be observant, to reflect and learn as we go along, rather than just be mere recipients and adapters of technology. When we cater to the local markets, we help in reducing the prices of our consumers and help them to have healthier, fresher food. When an individual farmer practices agroecology with a community or with an association or a cooperative, the more the farmer becomes resilient as she or he and the farmers or as she or he has the farmers organization to act as his agency or her agency to build her or his skills, to claim his or her rights, to influence policies, and to connect to markets, and to have the necessary volume to reduce transaction costs. So that is our observation, and we hope that there are researches that will prove this as well. Thank you very much, and back to you, ffinlo.
Thank you, Esther. That was so interesting to hear. And there's a couple of parts to this question, but perhaps you can help us through it. In your work at the FAO, you support international funding institutions such as the World Bank in delivering investment, particularly in low carbon and resilient livestock. You're also co-leading on the development of TAPE, which is the tool for agroecology performance evaluation. I wonder if you could talk to us about how countries or communities have responded to recent shocks, but within that, tell us a bit more about TAPE, what it is and how it works.
Thank you, ffinlo. Yes, I will try, and thank you for having me today. So I think, my fellow panelists said it very well, that the war in Ukraine is certainly a big shock for agricultural markets and for farmers. But they also said that it's also showing some more systemic challenges that we have to address. And I just saw something yesterday on LinkedIn. There is a recent study from IFPRI that has shown the rebalancing of the agricultural markets that has happened after the war, thanks to the exports of cereals from Latin America, for example, and the impact of weather, climate shocks on other countries that are usually also providing lots of cereals to developing countries, to low and middle income countries. So we saw that there are different drivers at place, and we cannot only consider the war in Ukraine in one country. Just like one example, I was in Tunisia recently for a training, and Tunisia is one of the countries that depend the most on imports of wheat from Ukraine. So this has impacted the price of bread very significantly, but very slightly delayed, there was a very strong impact on the price of dairy as well, because Tunisia depends on cereals as well for feed for animals. So we show that there are different challenges, and we also know that, for example, the price of energy that is rising because of the war is also strongly linked to the cost of feed, and that is very challenging for systems that use a lot of concentrate feed, rather than, for example, crop residues, byproducts, and grass. So the first question that we're raising with these shocks is the one of the food sovereignty of countries, obviously, but we're also talking about resilience in what we said. We're also talking about efficiency. And now, for example, I just mentioned the problem of recycling and recycling biomass nutrients that humans cannot eat, for example. All those elements that I mentioned are part of what FAO calls the 10 elements of agroecology. So this was the effort that we had to help provide a definition of agroecology that was approved by the FAO Council and our member nations in 2019. And that brings me to TAPE, the second part of your question, because the 10 elements of agroecology that help us define agroecology and measure it are really at the core of TAPE. TAPE was a tool that our member nations asked FAO to develop to help measure the multidimensional performance of agroecology. So we all agree on agroecology. We have lots of case studies around the world. Esther mentioned very interesting results. We know that we have many case studies like this. What we were trying to do with TAPE is to consolidate this and offer a way to basically harmonize the way of showing the performance of agroecology. So with TAPE and with all the partners that are implementing it at the moment in about 40 countries, we are providing this data to measure what is the status of the agroecological transition, how far are we in recycling, how far are we in sharing and co-creating knowledge, how far are we in moving towards more responsible governance and more equity in access to land, for example. So we measure this, and then we also measure how those systems, through data collected at farm level and territory level, how those systems that are placed differently in the transition to agroecology, how they perform in terms of productivity, in terms of providing diverse and nutritious diets, in terms of women empowerment, in terms of youth employment, in terms of biodiversity, etc. So that's what TAPE is and how it works. But I'd like to say that it really works because of all the partners that have been using it and that we're working with. Really, it's something that the first learning of this whole TAPE journey that we took for the past 3 years is that we rely on our partners. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne. I just wanted to focus on TAPE a little bit longer, the tool for agroecology performance evaluation. And you set out there the key themes that are part of it, but there's an obvious question around common metrics, not only how they get agreed, but also the need and the capacity for people to be able to understand and collect them at farm level. And so I wonder how we can ensure that metrics are genuinely globally comparable and that information is actually being gathered and recorded in the first place.
But that's a very difficult question. I mean, we're lucky enough in FAO to have this role, actually. We have a role to provide normative work to countries to help them harmonize metrics and so on. That's part of our work. It's also thanks to our position of being able to work with scientists, with governments, with NGOs, with farmers. So being able to gather different partners around the table, and there are processes for this. They're not short processes. They're usually long and they're usually not easy. It's a very difficult task, especially when it comes to metrics, because, well, it depends on what you want to measure. It depends on the objective. So whether you want to measure a system or farm or a project portfolio, for example, whether you want to measure at farm level or territory level, who do you want to inform with this evidence? Are you talking to policymakers? Are you talking to scientists? Are you talking to farmers? All this makes a tool very different. But what we started with is obviously to review what exists already. And there's a lot that has been done. Many different frameworks have been proposed for different contexts and different objectives. And we try not to reinvent anything, but to pick all the parts that are important and to use the methodologies that have been already tested, proven to be strong and robust, and use that in TAPE. And for doing this, we have to work a lot with scientists, but as I said, with governments and NGO and civil society. And from our position as FAO, this has been really a privilege. But it's not simple, and actually a tool to be globally relevant has to remain simple and to be implemented at a minimum cost. It's a very important part of it. Otherwise, it will remain a science tool. So we're happy to get where we are now. As I said, we have about 40 countries using TAPE at the moment. It's available in 25 languages. It has an online platform on Kobo. So these are all very important dimensions to make the tool globally relevant and applicable. The number of languages it's available in, if it's available online or not, that makes it very flexible. And maybe I should finish with that. It's still an everyday challenge to guarantee what you said on the global level comparability, but the local relevance of the tool. For example, we had to develop versions that are more adapted to pastoralists. We were asked also to develop a more advanced indicator on biodiversity. And for all this, we have to partner with different people. We're now working with an organization representing indigenous people to make TAPE more relevant for indigenous communities. So this is a challenge, and also to maintain the scientific accuracy and robustness of the tool. I think this is those three challenges, local relevance, but global comparability and scientific robustness, is really the three pillars of the challenges.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. I guess it sort of comes back to that whole sort of challenge of trying to balance the need of governments and the evidence that comes out of science and the academic world with the indigenous knowledge of farmers on the ground. And so, Esther, just sort of coming back to you, I'm wondering, is the Agroecology Coalition involved in this work? And are there ways that you can help with this issue of developing and collecting common metrics that work for farmers as well as for policymakers?
Yes, thank you for that question again, ffinlo. Yes, the Agroecology Coalition, which is composed of governments, research institutes, civil society, and farmers' organizations, we are working in this direction. As a first endeavor, last June 21 to 23, the GIZ sponsored a face-to-face workshop in Berlin. And the aim of that workshop was to develop a common framework or methodology to assess agroecology funding in donor and other portfolios, and to track funding flows, investments, and influence project design and selection. In this framework that the participants have developed, we adopted the 13 principles of agroecology as defined by the high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security and which are also aligned with the 10 elements of agroecology as defined by FAO. And in this framework also, each principle is assessed on a 3-level scale with a ratio of 0, 1, and 2. And the framework also introduces a set of red lines against which we will do a first screening of the project. Red lines will help us detect projects that counter agroecological values and will also help save time, as this project that is being assessed will be ranked as 0 and will not be rated for individual principles. The framework, when we use this framework, this can tell if the project is not agroecological or partially agroecological or is fully agroecological, practicing the 13 principles of agroecology. For me, as one of the 20 or so participants in this meeting, representing farmers' organization, while it is about tracking agroecology investments, no, the framework, I think, is also useful in helping us see whether our projects, the farms that we have, are agroecological or not. The same way as the tape. No? We in this workshop, we also discussed the tape. Remy Clousset from FAO presented the tape framework in this. And we use many of its of what is in the tape in this framework that was developed by this workshop group. Then after the workshop, the framework has been further refined and has been tested by some colleagues who attended the workshop. And as a way forward, we are looking forward to another meeting to reflect on its use and how to refine it further so that it can be more useful to donors, to civil society, and to farmers' organizations like us who would also like to track agroecology with our members. Thank you, and back to you, ffinlo.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yodit, we've already talked a little bit about farm level transition, but widespread transformation does depend upon that policy reform and financial incentives and regulatory change. Are you starting to see more action at the top in terms of national level policy reforms to increase resilience through agroecology?
Well, during this dialogue, the FAO and BioVision Foundation dialogue on agroecology as a response to agri-input price increase, we actually ask directly this question, like what are the policy reform that we are seeing, what are the policy reform that are necessary still and to be implemented to actually be less dependent on agri-inputs. And one of the participants recognized is actually to tax to redirect actually the subsidies and other financial tools that are supporting today synthetic fertilizer. For example, to tax
Yodit,
the use of yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you should turn the video off so that the audio can come through clearly. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me better now?
Well, yeah, let's see.
Okay. So one of the main policy reform that they really participants saw as important is actually to redirect subsidies, which are and other financial tools that are today supporting synthetic fertilizer. For example, to tax the use of synthetic fertilizer and to use the revenue to support agroecological transition, while actually at the same time lowering the tax on alternative inputs. They see that as a way of actually allowing also government to ease the burden that they have today on their budget from expensive synthetic fertilizer subsidies, and to encourage also local value generation. To give like one concrete example, as a result of this input price increase, in Ethiopia, home of 110 million people, and also a government encouraging actually normally an agriculture based on synthetic fertilizer, we saw a huge shift in the approach of the government, because they really realized that they will not be able actually to continue subsidizing fertilizer, and they actually incitated the transformation of the diversification of the use of different type of fertilizer by actually putting in place a task force and promoting actually to the use of organic fertilizer. And also they encouraged and they accelerated the registration of a number of alternative organic liquid fertilizer, which were actually there already present, but which didn't actually get the registration and the ability to be used by farmers. So that was really, this happened only just last year between March and December, and this is still ongoing processes. So there are really concrete things happening on the ground. But at the same time, I think personally that there are also some existing lockings in relation to the policy level. One of the things, for example, that you can see in West Africa, the Economic Community of West Africa, so ECOWAS, they are actually their budget for functioning is actually based on import. So in that sense, even if they are promoting agroecology, but they are also have a kind of their interest is also to in a way to maintain imports, so that they actually maintain also their budget. The budget is coming from a share on export of the 15 Western African countries that ECOWAS is actually representing. So you have a kind of indirect policy lockings, which might be difficult to really face on the short term.
Thanks very much. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Thinking about that national level change from your own perspective, and those challenges, I think that that Yodit set out there. What do you think are the best reasons to be hopeful about agroecological transformation as we go into 2023?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's always good to have hopes at the beginning of the year and then reassess at the end of the year whether the hopes were met or not. I guess personally, I'm really excited about the data that we have collected and we have started sharing with TAPE, with all the partners that we work with. We're still working on cross-country analysis, but we already have published reports on Argentina, Lesotho, Mali, different contexts, different challenges faced by different countries. And we have good data from many countries now that show that more agroecological systems are also the ones that provide more diverse nutrition, that empower women more, that provide more opportunities for young children and young people, that provide more biodiversity as well. And more agroecological systems, meaning the systems that are not only the more diverse or the more resilient or the more efficient, but also the systems where you find more sharing of knowledge, where you have more social and human values as measured in TAPE. So we have very good evidence, and it's very exciting to be able to share this probably in the next few months. Another reason that makes me very hopeful is that from our position in FAO, we see that financing institutions, and thank you, Esther, for mentioning also GIZ, are more and more interested in sustainable agricultural investments and referring more and more to agroecology in that matter. And they're less and less focusing on simple or simplistic approach for financing agricultural development and embracing the systemic approach like agroecology. We're working on this with IFAD, with the Global Environmental Facility. We have used TAPE on 4 projects for GEF in Senegal, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Yemen, for example, with the GIZ, not only multilateral, but also bilateral like the GIZ. And more recently, even the Green Climate Fund is also interested in it's the beginning, but it's also coming. For example, we're going to use TAPE in a project funded by the GCF in Malawi. So I think those are good signals. It doesn't mean that agroecology is now on the top of the agenda for these funding institutions, but they are realizing its importance. And finally, maybe my last takeaway from this year, and hope that we can continue in this direction for next year, is the very positive trend that I see with all the partners going in the same directions now when they're talking about agroecology. We still know we're not all talking the same languages when we speak about agroecology, but we made a lot of progress. And I think using figures, using evidence, using metrics has helped a lot for this, because we're not standing anymore on concepts and disagreeing about what should or should not be called agroecology, but we're actually getting our hands dirty and measuring. And we don't have to wait to have the perfect tool to start working. We realize this now. We can start pushing all in the same direction. And I think this is really a big takeaway for me and my big hope for this year.
And if I could just come back to you with a follow-up on that, you talked about efficiency within that sort of first point that you were raising. And one of the challenges that I've sort of been aware of, and I think a lot of us within the agroecology world is the potential distortion that can be created when you focus very hard on efficiency and on carbon efficiency in particular. And so I just wonder if you're starting to feel that there is a genuine rebalancing in the conversation, that there is a genuine understanding that that agroecology and delivering this resilience is about delivering a whole range of different metrics, of which carbon efficiency is one. That is a very good question, and I think we're not there yet to say it's rebalanced, but it has started to rebalance. As part of my work, I also work a lot on very simple metrics like greenhouse gas emission per kilogram of product. This is also a big expectation from donors, from institutions like World Bank. And there's struggling more and more to justify, maybe not at the size of World Bank, but more bilateral funding institutions for development are struggling to, for example, continue investing in small-scale livestock production, integrated crop livestock systems, like Yodit said earlier, because of these metrics that are very simple and simplistic metrics and only report on one dimension. And that's also why they're interested in broader and multi-dimensional, multi-criteria tools to be able to show that it's not only about carbon. Of course, the climate crisis is at the top of the agenda, and it has to remain this way. But we should not forget to continue measuring and improving on other metrics. For example, the efficiency of nutrient use is not the efficiency of carbon. It doesn't have to be strongly linked. It can happen in different ways. I think Esther provided a very good example for that. The efficiency in terms of biodiversity might not be directly linked to carbon either. They are links, but they're not exclusive. So I think this is very important, and it's starting. I would not say from my position, but it's a modest one. I wouldn't say that it is balanced, but we started to rebalance. And presumably TAPE is part of that. And I just wonder, just finally, how long it's likely to be. Is it a question of months or years before TAPE is in a position to really make a difference in that way? Well, I think it depends on in which context. But in terms of informing, for example, projects like the Global Environmental Facility projects, we already made a lot of. I think we're quite advanced. As I said, we already informed 4 very large projects in Sub-Saharan Africa and in the Middle East. So I think it's something that is already kind of established, at least in the FAO work with the Global Environment Facility. I think we also made excellent progress with IFAD on this topic. We're just starting with the GCF, and then for bilateral donors like GIZ or other national level development institution, it can and funder. It also depends on their interest for the approach. And we find that in several European countries, we have strong interest to use agroecology as a framework to invest and with their partners in low and middle income countries. In other countries, there's not such a strong interest, so there's more work to be done there. Thank you. Emile, if I can come back to you, we're dealing again with these big issues, but the countries worst hit by the food price crisis have been highly import dependent, low income countries, which we were sort of referring to before. I think it was Indonesia that we were talking about with Yodit, and many of these are also highly indebted. So we're talking about big macroeconomic challenges. Do you think that agroecology genuinely provides an answer to them?
I think the food crisis that we see in those countries have been the result of a combination, not only being net importers of food, but that is also linked to the fact that their agricultural systems have been focusing on an export orientation of a few commodities that are still tracing back to colonial times, when the majority of the investment in agriculture in developing countries was to provide inputs for industrialized countries, industries and trade. So this focus on export commodities at the expense of food security and food sovereignty in the countries is one of the factors that is undermining and creates dependency. And this is combined with a model of agriculture that has been proposed and unfortunately is still being proposed now, based on high external chemical input with the subsidies, etc. And I'll come back to that. But this is creating important dependencies. And this is a real priority, I think, for farmers, is to get out of these dependencies that have been impoverishing them. And what we've seen in, I think, is well known, the percentage of suicides by farmers in India, for example, but in many countries of the world, that are linked to the fact that their dependency has created a crisis situation where if they miss one harvest because of climatic conditions, or if they have an exceptional expense, medical expense, for example, and they can't reimburse the loans they have made, they are falling into a crisis situation they can't get out. And I think the agroecology is really providing an answer to these multiple dimensions, including this dependency, which is a major cause of impoverishment. And I think the agroecology allows us to move away from that. And there is now sufficient evidence at scale. I just want to give one example in Andhra Pradesh, where about 1 million farmers have now been practicing what they call natural farming, which is the name they give there to agroecology, with the result of an average increase in productivity, and especially an average increase in net income of 50% compared to people that or farmers that continue to practice high chemical input type of agriculture, because of the lower input costs and combination with higher production. So a very concrete example is that in Andhra Pradesh, among the communities that have been embarking on natural farming, on agroecology, there has not been a single suicide. And I think this is something that is very good demonstration of what can be done. So we must change the incentives. Yodit already mentioned the need to replace input subsidies, the chemical input subsidies for fertilizers, etc. And I think we must really put the finger on the vested interests that keep pushing for these input subsidies to be maintained, using the crisis now in the wrong way and saying, oh, we must produce more food and therefore we must use more fertilizers, etc., and trying to negate the alternative that agroecology is providing. And I think these pressures that are being put on many governments to continue with input subsidies is something that has to be addressed, has to be pointed at, and must be realized. There is a lot of lobbying being done to maintain this in place because of very obvious reasons of these industries wanting to continue selling these inputs. So I think this what is really the unique characteristic of agroecology is what I already mentioned at the beginning, is that it is really allowing us to address all the dimensions that are important, and I would say even implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in a holistic way by addressing and giving equal weight to economic, environmental, climate, nutrition, health, and social dimensions. And that is also what is being demonstrated by TAPE. The very encouraging results we are seeing already is the positive impact agroecological approaches have on these multiple dimensions, and not just on food security or not just on productivity, but really addressing all the issues that really matter to people. And I think this is what is the most encouraging about agroecology, and that starts to be realized now more and more.
I wonder, just sort of thinking about what you were saying there, Emile, about, particularly about the way in which, there is this big drive by lobbyists, particularly from the fossil fuel sector, which, it's drowning out very often, the relatively small amount of lobbying might and the lobbying power of people within the agroecology world. And I wonder where change is coming from your perspective, where you're seeing the biggest change. I mean, we've got citizen groups or citizens themselves, government, farmers, businesses, boardrooms, or international processes. There are so many different sort of stakeholders and actors within this stage. And I just wonder if you feel that there is more pressure coming from one place, or whether it's kind of evenly spread across all of those various stakeholders.
Well, I think the way that civil society has been mobilizing more and more to show the need for change and the options that do exist, I think that is rather encouraging. But one thing that we have seen in the last year is, I would say, not so much that people all of a sudden realize that agroecology is the answer, but that more and more at the country level, countries realize that the model of industrial agriculture is leading us to the cliff. It's not a long-term solution. We are seeing that even in the highest productivity areas of the world, we are seeing declining yields despite increasing uses of inputs, because of the soil degradation and the vulnerability to the climate change, the impact of climate already. So there is an increasing realization that what has been the dominant model of called industrial or conventional agriculture is not a long-term solution. And I think that realization also provides an opportunity to really move towards change, and where countries are starting to listen more to civil society, farmer organizations, indigenous people organizations that are advocating for that change and the need for supporting that change.
Thank you. Yodit, we've discussed the way in which compounding crises, especially high energy and fertilizer prices and rising hunger, have created a chance to initiate and embed individual transitions to agroecology within individual businesses, for individual farmers and landowners. Are there ways that we can help to ensure that these commitments continue even when those input prices come back down, if indeed they do?
I doubt that actually that the input prices will actually really go down, and but even if they do, I think there are more reasons to continue on agroecology beyond actually the price of input, and to show that what actually we're already talking about, like what are the multiple benefits that agroecology is bringing on the multiple dimensions, and to show that I think we need to do the analysis of the true cost of conventional farming and compare it to low input agricultural farms in the context of the current and also future higher fertilizer prices. And this true cost analysis should actually take into consideration all the impacts of a conventional production system on the environment, and compare also the nutritional value of each type of farming system, and also the social impact of post-production systems. And then that will actually show us that beyond the aspect of the input price itself, it is actually costing us much more to go with the conventional production approach, and that we will have a lot of benefits in shifting toward agroecological production approaches. So these are what actually TEP is also contributing to do. So showing those multiple performances of agroecology, and to show, and also in a way also to push this narrative on the yield per hectare, you know, comparing not only just on the yield per hectare, but also show other performances on resilience to climate change, on health benefits and premium prices also, and also other aspects which are maybe less put in front, like the capacity of agroecology to redynamize territories, local economies, and to also reduce dependency on inputs, of course.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really interesting the way in which, you know, while there are farmers, you know, that I deal with primarily within the global north who are, you know, moving to agroecology or are part of agroecology as a movement because they believe in it. But there are many more then coming to agroecology because they have reached some point of crisis within their own businesses. And of course, you know, and they've then found that, that they're able to be much happier, that they have much more control over their own profit margins and the resilience of their own land and business as a result. But of course, you know, this crisis is emerging and existing around the world, and it's about trying to find ways that we can persuade more and more farmers and food businesses right up the chain to adopt these practices before that crisis becomes worse, before that crisis becomes more personal to them. And it's a fascinating area. And Esther, right now, an industrial input intensive food system, it seems to me locked in place by a series of vicious cycles, including the concentration of profit and power and the sort of short-term thinking that's attached to quarterly financial reporting and fear, you know, of politicians that are locked into 4- and 5-year election cycles. So I wonder how we create positive feedback loops that help to lock in that agroecological transformation.
Thank you again, ffinlo, for the question. First, we think that there must be a shift of mindset on the power that farmers hold, particularly small-scale women, men, and young farmers, that they are not just victims, but they are also solution providers. And when organized and given enough capacities for management, leadership, and advocacy, we can also have the power to change the system, to influence policies, to elect leaders who will be more supportive of agroecology. Anna and Emile talked about empowerment, and we do agree. The shift in investment in agriculture should be in investing in the empowerment of the agency of family farmers, providing spaces for women and young farmers to address the needs of their members through recognition of their groups and making them equal partners in service delivery, in agri-research, innovation, extension, policy making, in negotiating contracts with different companies. Because farmers' organizations and cooperatives consolidate the material and non-material wealth of its members as well as the voice of its members. And investing in the empowerment of farmers through their associations or organizations or cooperatives to do agroecology and capture more market power is a long-term investment. It may take, in our experience, it may take as short as 5 years to as long as 10 years of investment in making sure that the organization or cooperative is stable, also resilient, and no turning back, so to speak. So we see that a shift also will be in terms of how funding now goes to agroecology and the kind of and the nature of the cooperation and the duration of the funding. So it has to be a bit long and more flexible and more dynamic to capture the dynamics and realities in mainstreaming and in transitioning to agroecology. We in AFA is part of community of practices such as the community of practice on forgotten foods and traditional local crops, we are part of multi-stakeholder coalitions such as the Agroecology Coalition and the International Land Coalition, as well as the World Rural Forum, which is a coalition of farmers promoting UN Decade of Family Farming. And we see that these coalitions also, especially multi-stakeholder coalitions with government, civil society, research organizations, and farmers organizations, and with farmers organizations treated as equal partners and should be at the center and at the heart of these coalitions. If these are done well and effectively, this can also provide positive feedback loop for agroecology, because these coalitions will be the platforms and the venues for sharing of experiences, for addressing the challenges and gaps, as well as implementing what should be done in a more in solidarity with one another, providing roles and responsibilities to each each stakeholder according to their mandate and according to their capacities and needs.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. Thank you. We've just got 1 or 2 minutes left, Emile, before we go to the Q&A. And I just finally, sort of picking up on some of those issues, I wonder how we demonstrate to people, to society, to governments, that agroecological transition is a short-term opportunity as well as a longer-term necessity.
Well, I think that what we have already seen, that the data that have been harvested through TAPE really shows how this is providing an answer in the short and the long term. The evidence that has come out of the example I gave from Andhra Pradesh is there, and there are many other reports that have been coming out recently that really demonstrate the potential both as a short and a long-term solution. I think there will always be people that will say, well, we need more evidence. And of course, if we look at the investments that are still being made in research, the vast majority of those investments are still based on an industrial model of agriculture. The assessments that have been made recently show that something between 1% and 5% have only been invested in agroecological research. And so, of course, you can't expect many more results if there's no investment in research to generate it. But I think there is enough evidence right now. First of all the research that has been done, all the results of TAPE as well, have shown that the positive impact of agroecological systems on these multiple dimensions. So we have no longer the choice to say we need to generate more evidence before we start changing. The climate crisis that we are living in today, the alarming messages that we've heard from IPCC and the recent climate summit again, shows us that we have no time to delay anymore the transformation that is needed. We really need to do that now. And it's only people that don't want to hear the right message that are still saying we need more evidence. There is one other dimension that hasn't been touched upon yet, is the whole issue of land degradation. About 1/3 of agricultural land, and actually probably even more, is degraded or severely degraded, undermining the long-term potential to continue to feed the world. And the only way to overcome and to restore fertility in degraded land is through agroecology. And that is a very strong reason, again, to accelerate the transformation and avoid the need for further deforestation to go into new land. So I want to end up just in a positive note. There is real evidence that people are starting to realize the need for the change and the urgency of the change. And one example is the Agroecology Coalition that was launched last year, but counts already 44 countries, and that includes as well economic communities like the European Commission, the ECOWAS Commission, the African Union Commission as well, and also 88 organizations, including 5 UN organizations, farmer organizations, indigenous people organizations, research organizations that are working together to accelerate the transformation that is needed. And I think that is very encouraging. There are still new members joining the coalition every month. And countries that 2 years ago, I would not have believed they would ever join an agroecology coalition are now members. So I think there is really an opportunity there that we must seize and continue to push very hard and counter the obstacles that we are still facing.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Emile. That's brought us up to the hour. Thanks so much to all of our speakers. And now, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to move to a question and answer session. Unfortunately, we need to do this little jiggle, which I haven't done before, so I hope it works. So I think that when you're looking at this conversation through Crowdcast, you'll see a link that you need to use to join the Zoom that we're in. Panelists, please stay where you are. But if the audience, if you'd like to join us for that Q&A, if you could click that link now and join us on the Zoom, we will begin those questions in about 1 minute's time. Thank you very much. So let's see if I'm able to just admit everybody.
Yeah, more people seem to be coming in now.
Yeah, and I think that I have to admit people, not quite one by one, but nearly. Great. I wonder if I can make anybody else. Robbie, I'm gonna make you a co-host if you can hear me, so that you're able to admit additional people as we go, because there are lots of people coming in the whole time, but I don't want to run out of time for the questions. There we go. Great. I can see that Robbie's accepted that particular challenge. We have a question here for Esther. Esther's point, this is from Diana Smith. This is Esther's point about cooperation between small-scale food producers to bring it to the market is important. In the UK, we lack the structures that we need to get people working together effectively. So the question is, how could we stimulate this? Is financial support needed? What role do our governments have?
Yes, Diana, thank you for the question. Indeed, the government has a role to play by providing incentives for cooperatives, for farmers to organize themselves into cooperatives. Incentives can come in the form of, for example, tax exemptions or tax breaks or discounts, or links to markets or some discounts in terms of some seeds, for example, that the farmers would need to buy, or share in the capital, for example, when you like to have storage facilities so that you could prolong the shelf life and of your product. So this support is needed by cooperatives, especially if they are just starting. But of course, in terms of how to attract the farmers to join a cooperative, it's basically really what is needed is really very effective organizing work at the local level, and starting from where their issues are. Like, for example, if their issue is they have a volume of produce, but they cannot sell it to the market. They don't know how to sell it, or they have a volume of produce, but they cannot dictate the prices. It's always the middleman who dictates the price. So it's really starting from what kind of need or what kind of challenge does the farmer have, you know? And also for actually in many Asian countries, cooperatives have a bad connotation, because the cooperatives in the past have been very weak, and the leaders have had mismanagement of funds. So we have to show them the successful cooperatives, no, and have so many membership pre-membership seminars, so that they could really know the benefits of cooperatives, which is basically about profit sharing, dividend, and patronage refunds, and having a voice, no, in the direction of the organization. I hope it helps, Diana. Thank you.
I wonder if I could open that question up to other panelists, and with the additional sort of thought around, you know, fantastic. Thanks so much for your answer there, Esther. And the idea that, you know, the market is important, government stimulation, etc. But there is still a challenge from a citizen perspective of actually being able to find food that you know, comes from agroecological systems. There are so many claims and competing claims, and I wonder if you have thoughts about ways that farmers can communicate with consumers, with citizens, and vice versa, how citizens can actually find that information for themselves. Anybody want to pick that up? Go on, Emile. Thank you. You're on mute, Emile.
Sorry. I think there's a lot of work being done on developing shorter supply chains and re-establishing closer links between producers and consumers, which is one characteristic of agroecological system. And that may involve participatory guarantee systems whereby producers is guaranteed through a participatory process that does not involve the high cost of external certification as we have for organic produce. But there are also other initiatives starting with charters being established at the local community level. And a lot of that is really based on re-establishing these links and trust. These are all systems that are based on trust, and that requires these linkages between consumers and producers. And there's a lot of different systems re-establishing local farmer markets, food baskets being supplied directly to consumers, community-supported agriculture, where really the communities are supporting farmers directly to produce for them. And so there's a lot of innovation going on there that needs to be supported, and where a policy environment that is supportive of the development of these initiatives has to be created.
Fantastic. Let's move on to the next question, which happens to stay with you, Emile, if that's okay. The question is from Silke Bolmer. I apologize if I've not pronounced that correctly. Policymakers need more positive examples. You know, this is sort of, everybody needs more positive examples, I suppose. Is there a meaningful collection of evidence that you're aware of higher resilience through agroecology during this crisis?
Well, I think we mentioned already the results of TAPE that Anne described, which really is providing this kind of evidence. The results of the work being done in Andhra Pradesh has been published, including in scientific journals, so not only in more broad public publications, but also in refereed journals. So I think the evidence exists for people that want to look at the evidence. The problem is that there is still efforts being made to undermine the credibility of agroecology by vested interests. And there are groups being funded to actually write articles that undermine the credibility of agroecology, and instead are praising the potential of biotechnology as the universal solution, etc. So we must be aware of those efforts. But I think the evidence is there now. It's only people that really don't want to see the evidence that will still be saying we need more.
I wonder if somebody who isn't me is able to find a link to the tape findings, for example, and to anything else that we're talking about. If you're able to put links into the chat so that people can set those pages up so they can read them once we've finished this session, that would be really helpful.
I'm happy to do that, Ffinlo, no problem.
Thanks so much. That'd be great. And Esther, you were wanting to come back in.
Maybe just to provide an example and to follow up what Emile said. No, I remember our member in Cambodia, they were practicing system of rice intensification, and the government was not paying attention to it, but they just kept on doing it, expanding to more and more members. And what they did was to show and tell to their local government officials and to their ministers of the effect, of the positive effect of the SRI, in their farms. So, and after like maybe 15 years of implementing SRI by the organization, the Cambodian government has adopted it as a strategy for increasing their rice production, because at that time they were aiming to do exportation of rice. So this is what we see, at the national level. Okay, there will be very good global policies, there will be very good experiences, but if there is no one at the country level who will be pushing it and showing it how it is done, how it can be done, then the chances of doing it is very low. So we really want the empowerment of farmers to show and to experiment, to show and tell their experience to the policymakers. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. It's just a question from Nancy, Eastbourne Food Partnership. I think we've covered really part of it, but the question also, Yodit, is whether you would be able to share the details of your study. So if you are, perhaps you could pop that into the chat. And then a question for you, Yodit, is do we need, or don't we need, to wean ourselves off fossil fuel derived fertilizers altogether, in the short to medium term? As an organic farmer, this is from George Browning, as an organic farmer, I know this would be possible. So making the best use of mixed farming systems that include livestock to provide fertility. Yodit, are you able to come in on that? I think we've possibly lost.
Yeah, I had a shortcut. I mean, I've been out.
I think we've lost
seconds, so I kind of missed part of your question. If you can just summarize.
Yes, indeed. Just very quickly, the question really is: don't we need?
I've been away for a few.
I think we're possibly losing you still, Yodit. Just let me know if you're there.
I'm here. I can hear you.
Great. So the question is, don't we need to wean ourselves off fossil fuel derived fertilizers altogether? As an organic farmer, I know it's possible through making the best use of mixed farming systems that include livestock to provide fertility.
Yes, indeed. In the long term, that's actually what should be the process of going, like getting independent of the fossil fuel. Because it's not only the impact of fossil fuel and synthetic fertilizer is not only on agriculture. We actually have impact on other aspects, like on climate, for example. The transport of synthetic fertilizer, the production of synthetic fertilizer are emitting a lot of greenhouse gases. So these are also other negative impacts that the production of synthetic fertilizer is having beyond the negative impact that can also have on agriculture. However, this is something that needs to be done in a progressive way. It's not, it has to be we need to really accompany, really support farmers in the process of reducing and being independent of synthetic fertilizer by building slowly the production system, by the diversification, by also providing other alternative organic inputs. It's not something which can be done from one day to another. It needs to be also supported and being really accompanying farmers in the process.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So a question for Anne Mottet from Stuart Boothman. Says, really pleased to hear from you at FAO. How can your work with the agroecology section of the FAO extend to actual food sovereignty and seed sovereignty for farmers?
That's a good question. I mean, the work I reported about today was really about metrics and methods. So this can help, and we covered that already. But the work of FAO on agroecology doesn't stop with TAPE. We also piloting what we call the Scaling Up Agroecology Initiative. And we have some pilot countries there where those questions are also addressed. We are also trying to mainstream agroecological approaches and agroecology as an approach, as I mentioned before, in agricultural development projects. So the ones of FAO, but also the ones of our partners like other UN agencies like IFAD or development funds like the grants that you can receive for climate through the GCF or the GEF. So I think through these approaches, through these projects, by mainstreaming the importance of food sovereignty and the question of having access to local genetic resources, whether for plants or animals, is mainstream this way as well. This is part of TAPE. There are specific indicators on this in TAPE, and through measuring this in those investments and projects as well, this is a way to mainstream. But we also have, as FAO, all the technical support work that we provide directly to countries through our country offices, and this requires a lot of, I would say, maybe capacity development of extension services of our partners in the countries through and also our offices in the countries as well, to be aware, to know how to deal with these questions, and to know how to also include them in the technical work directly done in the countries by our decentralized offices. So it goes to different aspects, informing, providing the evidence, but also capacity development is a big part of the work, and mainstreaming in development projects.
Thank you. Emile, is that a hand?
Yes, I saw a question about scale, and I agree. This is a question that often comes up, and often people are saying, yes, agroecology, that's fine for people with 3 goats and 5 sheep, or small horticulture production, but it doesn't work to feed the world. I think there is, again, enough evidence of large-scale farms that have been functioning in the past as industrial farms. I visited a farm in France of 260 hectares, which is a reasonably large farm for French scale, that has been moving first to organic agriculture about 20 years ago, or even more than 20 years ago, and now really shifted to implement agroecology in a more integrated way, that has been not only allowed to produce higher income, but also because it created a lot of new employment. They were adding value to their products. So it's a real integrated, different approach that allowed them also to have a better quality of life, where the people working on the farm were able to take their 6 weeks of vacation like other workers in France, and also not having to work every weekend, despite the fact that they had 100 cows to milk every day. So I think the examples of this operating at scale exist in France, in the United States. There are also examples. I know another farm in Austria, again at large scale, that is really demonstrating the potential to implement this at scale. So agroecology is not just for small farms or small scale producers. It can be really implemented at all scales.
Thank you. There was a direct question that came in, Esther, which was very much linked to this, and I wonder it was specifically for you. So I wonder if you've got any particular thoughts to add to what Emile's just said there.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, actually, I don't have any experience about large farms being transitioning to agroecology. So I'm very happy to hear that. The example of Emile in France and in Austria. And we are in communication also with some farmers who have bigger farms, 20 hectares, 30 hectares in Asia. That's very big already. They're not our members, but when we kind of are in the platform, they are asking also this. So I could also tell them about this experience that she have shared, Emile. But yes, actually, for a small scale farmers would really, they have adapted. They are adapting quite easily to agroecology as long as there is support, no, in terms of training and extension and markets, no, because in our experience, the transition to agroecology, it means that you have reduced income maybe in the first 3 years now, because you will be changing patterns in farming, in planting, like that. So they need to have some support when they are transitioning to agroecology in the first 3 years.
Thank you. We've got time for another couple of questions, and there's one that's just come in, which I'm just going to pump up, which is, do we have enough journalists telling the story of what farmers and producers are doing? And I choose that partly, it's from Diana Smith, partly because I see a lot of stories about agriculture in the press, and so many of them are negative. Do we have enough positive stories coming through, do you think? And what is the role of any of our organizations in making sure that more positive stories come through? Obviously, the Farmgate podcast, please listen to that. We pump out a lot of positivity, but from the mainstream media. Any thoughts, anybody? Go on, Emile.
Yeah, the communication and advocacy dimensions are very important, and within the Agroecology Coalition, there is one of the 5 working groups that has been established to focus on communication and advocacy. And there, I think there's an effort to create clear messages that can be easily picked up and understood also by the wider public. But I think there will also be a need to really reach out to journalists in a proactive way, in order to get them the stories that they can then work on. So I fully agree with the comment that we need to make efforts to reach out to journalists that can then relay the message more broadly. And this is one of the priorities of the Agroecology Coalition.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have a hand up there too?
Yeah, no, just to support exactly what Emile was saying, and also to say that in the past couple of years, we've seen some interesting initiatives by farmers themselves to communicate directly. There are excellent groups of farmers on Twitter, for example, but also on other channels. And it's big communities, you know, sometimes they reach 20, 30,000 members, just telling what they're doing, you know, and coming to the barn this morning, I found this cow that was not good and this and that, and, you know, showing the reality of production and directly engaging with just the public as you know, as a whole, and I think that's also very positive. Obviously, they're the younger generation of farmers, the ones who are using social media, but it's also I think something that maybe somehow we can support as, you know, international organizations or scientists or multi-stakeholder platforms, you know, reaching out to those existing groups and maybe supporting the development of these kind of groups also in low and middle income countries. It's already happening, but to a lesser extent, obviously, and I think that can be very positive.
Fantastic. And what you mentioned there about social media are certainly a lot of the farmers that I talk to around the world and have done recently in our Regen Dairy project is that, you know, WhatsApp has been incredibly helpful for people to get kind of real-time answers to questions that they're kind of facing in the field at that moment. And also, you know, we're not The Guardian, we're not BBC, but do look up Farmgate Media, Farmgate Podcast, which is on all standard podcast providers, from Apple to Spotify, etc. And within there, we've got a series that we've been looking at on Regen Dairy, and particularly looking at the challenge of scaling that, with dairy being a very high input industry, particularly in the developing world, and also one that people might enjoy on conscious food and how we embed more consciousness into our food systems. Got one final question that I'm going to put it. The note I've got is that it's for Yodit or Emile. Let's start with Yodit and just see how the connection's working. So the final question is: carbon calculators and eco-labeling, which are guiding consumer choices, are usually based on carbon efficiency rather than multidimensional metrics. Is this a problem, and what could we do about it? Yodit.
I don't have all the maybe details about that, but I do think that focusing only on the carbon aspect is actually really limiting and doesn't show all the different criteria for which actually farmers, consumers should actually be making their choices. But I can't say more about that. I'll let maybe Emile complete this.
I would certainly agree that this is a problem, and even the carbon calculations that are often made are very partial and don't really show the full impact even on carbon. But beside the fact that they should not be looking only at carbon, there has been a mention already about the notion of the true cost of food, the impact that our food production has on the environment, on health, and the costs that are related to that. And that's something that we haven't really touched upon, but this is, we are talking about trillions of dollars a year, trillions of dollars. The impact of our food system on health is really mind-boggling. I can't even imagine what a trillion actually means in real terms, but this is something, if a small fraction of that was invested in changing our food systems, in transforming it, support the agroecological transformation, we would be a long way in making tremendous savings, not only in the environment, but on our health bills. And I think this is something that has to receive much more attention in the future as well.
Yeah, thank you very much. And when you're talking about carbon metrics there, of course, there is still this tendency to use inaccurate or incorrect metrics in terms of methane that greatly distort the impact there. And it's always worth remembering that the IPCC has recognized that GWP 100 overstates the impact of stable ongoing emissions from ruminants, for example, by a factor of 3 to 4. So it is worth sort of just treating some of these things with caution, and again, therefore recognizing the importance of this multidimensional element. Look, thanks so much, everybody. That's all we have time for. Thanks for your questions. Apologies if we didn't manage to get to yours. I'm sure you'd agree it's been a fascinating hour and a half spanning a complex range of issues there. I'd like to thank our panelists, Yodit, Kebede, and Mottet from the FAO, Emile Frison from IPES Food, and Esther Penunia from the Agroecology Coalition. This Zoom is going to end in just a moment, so if you want to take any links from the chat, I urge you to do that very rapidly. But thank you so much to everybody in the audience for joining us here online today. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I've been ffinlo Costain from the Food and Global Security Network and the Farmgate podcast. And all that remains is for me to wish you a very happy New Year. Bye for now.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Happy New Year to everybody. Bye.